Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Freelance, episode 13. Welcome back. We're today I've collected some friends who are as excited about the old world as I am. Nick, of course, is here all the time, and Alex was here for the first live stream that I did. And I know that he has a real interest in Warhammer, just like Nick and I do. So when we were thinking about who we would want to talk about the old world with, Alex was well, he was actually the only person we talked about. Great to have you both, and yeah, what I thought we'd go through some of the iconic old Warhammer art and just talk through the armor. I'm not planning on doing like a tier list or anything like that, but talk through like plus points, negatives, and then maybe see if we could decide which armor each of us would want if we were to get one.
Mm-hmm.
But before we do, let's just very quickly go through some quick stuff. So last month, Nick and I set ourselves some targets for each month, and that's kind of to try and keep us honest and to get us actually working on stuff. Nick, your target for January was to finish a project, any project. It was very open. How have you done?
Knew I had a lot, just all in various stages. Yeah, I think I've done all right. Aside from finishing some old world armies, well, as much as an army can ever be finished, getting some armies onto the table, should we say. I successfully finished some base layers for Orc Empire kit, which was good. So that's all put together. But the thing that I was really happy with that I basically finished, I'm just waiting for the final bit of glue to arrive, is I made myself a little notebook. So did the leather dyeing, the binding and everything. It's based off an existing limp bound manuscript, but parchment is quite expensive. So instead of doing a parchment cover, I did a soft leather cover. And also the original manuscript, I can't remember the manuscript number, I'd have to look it up. It's a sort of 1510 limp bound manuscript, I think, or 1515. Has very, very thin pages with the paper that form the text block. And I wasn't confident working with modern paper that thin, because to get modern linen paper that thin be incredibly expensive. So I had to use a modern substitute, which means the paper is a lot heavier, which means to get the approximate same size as the document, I have many fewer pages. So it's more of a notebook than a reference book. Like the original, I think, has something like 150 pages in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say I finished a couple of projects. Oh, and I fixed a problem that I was having with my LARP scabbard, and in doing so, realized I had to replace the buckle plate. So that's kind of not finished.
Okay, cool. So a lot more than your one. It's good to start on a positive, because I managed to do one of my targets, and even then only just, and actually probably not. So my targets were to finish off my LARP breastplate, which is wearable and it's working. I'm pleased with it so far, but it's not quite in what my planned finish state is. But I'm going to count that as finished. The other one was to do 4 videos. I only did 3, so I failed that one. And then my third one was to make something to sell at Empire. I didn't manage to do that because I spent a long time clearing my shed, but I did manage to find about 4 things that I had already made and forgotten about that I could actually possibly sell. So, it's a possibility. Alex, I know you weren't here when we were setting our targets, but have you been up to much from a building or painting point of view?
Building paint, I have kind of, in that I've been reorganizing - remodeling the house. So I now have a costuming and crafting room, which is multiplying mannequins at a scary rate. And that has freed up space for me to also have a modeling and painting room, which means I've discovered things I'd forgotten that I had. So I ended up doing a giveaway a few weeks ago to people on my channel of various tabletop wargaming boxes where I'd gone, at some point you go, oh, there's a new release. So you put that in and they're like, oh, I don't remember having that. And so you get a bunch of stuff. And then, clearing it out, I'm like, I have 3 of this box. I'm never going to get around to painting 3 of this box. I can maybe keep 1 or 2 of this box. So the other 1 or 2 go on the giveaway pile. I finally sorted out a paint scheme for my Battlefleet Gothic collection, which is basically I found a fairly nice and detailed but quick and easy way to do the original box art scheme. I've begun compiling my Brettonian list.
Yes.
And for what Alex's favorite armor is.
You're talking about finding things in boxes. I found completely unsullied, well, apart from a coffee stain on the front page, an original roster pad for 4th edition.
Wow.
Nice. Yeah. And on a slightly macro scale, I got a new longbow, tried to draw it, and then discovered that, if you don't do archery for 4 months because it's freezing cold and you're busy, you lose a lot of tone. So I'm back on the old bow trainer to try and get myself back up to the point where I can draw the blasted thing.
Yeah, I'm dreading the next time I sit on a horse. I think it's going to be horrendous. It's been a long time. So yeah, getting back in the saddle, both metaphorically and physically, it's going to be tough.
I went back to weapons training for the first time in a while because I've been had got a wrist strain, and then working with a computer made it worse and everything. And that was a workout. We're definitely back in that. Oh yeah, that's how everything fits or doesn't fit, and hurts or doesn't hurt.
Yeah. The season will be with us before we know it.
Yeah.
Well, guys, Alex isn't going to be with us for the whole show tonight, probably. So I want to get us started on the discussion. Great to see some people already saying hello in the chat. So good evening, Bishop. Hello, Thought. Is it Thought He Glass or is it Though the Glass? I don't know. Well, hi guys. Do sound off in the chat and say hello. And as we go through, feel free to add your own thoughts to ours, because we may well not say what you're thinking. So Warhammer, I'm no longer surprised when I find out that a reenactor friend of mine has also got an interest in Warhammer. Like, it's just, you kind of almost assume it now. So I'm assuming as well that a lot of the guys that normally join us for these or watch my videos might also be into Warhammer, and so therefore might also be aware that Games Workshop has returned to the old world. Yes, we know that it is actually just a fantasy version of our world. So we are aware of that. Everyone's aware of that. It's great to hear, actually. There's been some great history of Warhammer videos on a channel called Jordan Sorcery. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. So he does Warhammer videos, but it's not like Warhammer lore. It's Warhammer history of real world, like how did they come up with this stuff, who worked on what, and like the evolution of the games and stuff.
That sounds like something I should watch.
Oh, it's a massive rabbit hole. and he's had some live interviews with people like Rick Priestley. I'm trying to think. Thomas Prinran, Gav Thorpe. The big names from when when it was being formulated, and very much they were saying that the old world was intentionally kind of a bit of a fantasy version of our world. They were intending to do that, and a lot of them had a great interest in history. So that is why that's why we see that. What that means is we are going to say at some points, this is very similar to such and such an armor, because it was intended that be the case. So let's have a look. So the old world is starting up again, and they've returned to a different part of the old world's time period. So they're not doing all of the factions. So I've only got the 9 factions that are being supported. If people are interested in this sort of thing, then we can revisit all of the factions.
Do the renegades.
Yeah. So let us know if you'd like us to talk through that. Leave a comment, that sort of thing. Okay. So I thought we'll start off with what, strangely, in this version isn't the poster child, but basically has been the poster child for a lot of Warhammer Fantasies existence, the Empire. And this painting I've chosen to represent the Empire has got some, I think it's iconic. It was part of the State Troops box.
This is 7th edition art, right?
I'm going to say 6th, but yeah, it's not the earliest. I think it's kind of, glory days.
I think this was the I'm going to full nerd out here. I'm pretty sure that this is the 7th edition kit, rather than the 6th edition kit from the 6th edition starter.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's absolutely, like, it captures the aesthetic of what they were going for with the Empire at this time, and like what the Empire has been in Warhammer.
Yeah.
The funny part for me is coming sort of back to the re-release of the old world from back when I was originally interested in my mid-teens. In my mid-teens, I was just like, "Ooh, men in shiny armor." And nowadays, coming at it from a perspective of actually knowing a little bit more about the armor, it's very interesting just looking at this and going, yeah, there's a definite time period for this.
Yeah. So this is obviously, the Empire is very much based on the 16th century Europe, particularly thinking about the Holy Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking at this painting specifically, guys, do you have any thoughts on the outfits and the armor in this one?
Well, you've got some salets on some very, very basic salets on the sort of I wouldn't say the line troops, but the regular troops, far left and far right. They've all got the characteristic Renaissance pants.
Yeah.
Renaissance trousers. You've got tassets on this on the guy with actually both guys in the front. The guy with the red shield, let's go with that.
Yeah.
He's got some interleaved tassets. Not entirely sure about that breastplate, but
yeah. An interesting fact that I found out about tassets, because that's similar to some of the 17th century tassets as well that the infantry armor would have, in that it's segmented. But apparently on a lot of the pikeman armor in the 17th century, it was made to look like it was segmented and articulated, but actually wasn't. So although you might think something like that wouldn't be worn by a low status soldier like this, they did, and it wasn't always functional. Sometimes it was actually just faked for the look of it. So I think it's really interesting.
Make people feel like soldiers. I one of the things that strikes me about this art from this period and the Empire in particular in this period is I wonder if the sculpt came before the art or if the sculpt was made because of this art, because it's so close to the miniatures in a lot of ways. I think this this captures the sort of weird pseudo-religious part of the Empire as well, with like the scroll work and the armor seals and kind of the over-the-top ostentatiousness of what are even just common soldiers here. And yeah, I love the Landsknecht aesthetic with the slash trousers and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously got the anachronisms. I mean, the guy on our front and center guy here's got a rondel dagger. It's actually hilariously a very recognizable rondel dagger. You can even see the way the sheath is flared, and of course they're both wielding heater shields and arming swords. Which, I mean, okay, to be fair, 16th, 17th, 15th, 16th century, there's nothing wrong with a heater shield and an arming sword, but it's not exactly frontline weaponry at that by that stage.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a nice selection of poleaxes and halberds behind.
It very much feels to me, and I don't know who sculpted this particular kit. I think the way that they they do it now is they sculpt the kits and then they do the art and the rules afterwards.
I think this is a Mike Anderson kit.
I know that he was involved in some of these, and I know he did the great swords, but it very much feels like whoever has done these is very much aware of the historical armor, and the anachronisms are intentional.
Yeah, I mean, because it's like with that rondel dagger. That's not a typical dagger design you just slap on a vaguely medieval Renaissance piece of artwork. You've had to have made a deliberate choice, otherwise it would just be your more standard, oh look, it's like an arming sword but smaller, which you get on a lot of stuff.
One of the things that I think, Alex, you kind of almost mentioned it, this breastplate on this guy, these low style breastplates I think are basically always worn with a gorget. That's why it's so low at the front. And I wonder if that sort of thing is because this art is being based on a model, which at the time these were far more modular than many of the models, the more modern ones, weren't they? Because torso and legs and arms, everything was separate, and basically you wouldn't have the neck modeled in a way that was clear what was going on because it was all ball and socket joints. So I wonder if this is an artist filling in, where if the obviously if it was Michael or maybe it was one of the Perrys or someone might have had a different idea of how that neck would have gone if it weren't for the constraints of modeling.
Yeah, I do like the fact our front and center guy with the white shield in his sword hand, he's got again recognizably mitten gauntlets, but also it's those two-fingered ones. There's a specific detail that it's not just mitten gauntlets, it's two-finger mitten gauntlets. So like you say, whoever drew this clearly knew what they were doing. They clearly knew what specific armor pieces and weapon types were, and then we're obviously adapting it to what the miniatures were, and also just the general setting. And I suppose, to be fair, as you said, these aren't exactly the highest status of Empire troops. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of mileage, I suppose, in going, well, maybe this is what this particular chap happened to have in his home. Maybe he doesn't have the gorget or whatever.
One of the things I find super interesting as well is like a comparison between this art and kind of medieval art, is that medieval art has those weird details in it as well. But something that strikes me as very different in the details in this is that lots of these soldiers are wearing pouches and carrying pouches, and you very, very rarely see that in medieval art of people in armor, that they're wearing any kind of pouch, or that if they are wearing a pouch, that it's visible.
Yeah.
Just things that strike you.
Yeah, and modern reenactors often do that as well. I think we have a lot of stuff that we need in an everyday carry, and we assume that everyone would have always had that. But really, was that the case? Like, how much stuff did the everyday soldier need to carry into battle? Was there really anything that he couldn't just leave in his billet or with the boys back at the baggage train?
He didn't have his car keys. He didn't have his mobile phone. If he had any cash, it was probably in the form of a few coins, which you don't need a whole pouch for. If he's been paid at that point.
And if you do have that, do you want that on the outside of your armor where it can get hit by weapons and cut?
Yeah. Hide it in the webbing in your helmet or something. Okay, so guys, I probably, if anyone was listening on headphones, that probably hurt them there. What are either of you going to battle in an Empire swordsman or halberdier's kit? Is that your jam, or is this not really what we're going for?
If the last few HEMA sessions I've done are any indication, I want some leg armor.
Okay.
It's interesting. Not obviously this style of armor, but my typical like lower status soldier equipment that I wear on the battlefield is chest protection in a brigandine and lightweight arms, which is essentially what the lead soldier here is wearing. Like, we can't see what he's wearing on his legs, but most of the other soldiers in the picture here are not wearing leg armor. But I would fight with the polearm, not like no arming swords for me, thank you.
I'm probably slightly more risk averse. If I was I wouldn't necessarily say no to going on a battlefield wearing the level of armor that you can generally see in this bit of artwork, but I would want to be some kind of ranged weapon user at that stage.
Yeah. For me, I do like ostentatious stuff, but the 16th century, like this kind of German Gothic, is not really my bag. So the Empire never really got me excited. Yeah, I collected an Empire army at some point, but I think I probably collected, in inverted commas, every army. It's an aesthetic, it's a strong aesthetic look. Yeah, it's a strong aesthetic look, and I think it's not for me. Right, let's move on. Tomb Kings. So these guys were part of the release of the new edition. Basically, fantasy ancient Egypt. What are your thoughts on these? They're basically non-existent. Let's talk about the weapons, really, the shields and the khopesh.
Well, it's basically undead zombie Egyptians.
Yeah. So I think there are many things to be said about some of the older sculpts in the Tomb Kings range, but given the brief of undead ancient Egyptians, they absolutely nail it in almost every case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the spear there is very clearly a case of artwork following the model.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because you at the 28 mil dash heroic 32, whatever you want to call it, the scale that Warhammer comes in, there is no way you're doing realistic size spear points.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously comically oversized spear aside, and also the fact that spear tip is clearly iron, that Kopesh is bronze. The Kopesh side of things, on the other hand, that's fine. Ancient Egyptian, certainly there's definitely apart from the bow is actually, I don't know if either of you guys went to the Tutankhamun exhibition when it was in London a few years ago.
No, I missed it. Although I am excited about the life in the Roman army.
The Legion ones. I've been to that already. It's really good.
I watched your video on it, and now I want to take my voice.
Yeah, it's probably the single largest collection of actual Roman arms and armor that's probably going to be assembled anywhere for a while. But yeah, no, that bow, the third skeleton there's got, is actually very similar to in overall style to Tutankhamun's bow. They're very thin, very very simple weapons, and even though these shields that they've got are a little bit ornate and a little bit large, when you look on I don't know, at the Aswan reliefs or Karnak or whatever, the Egyptian soldiers, they do carry this kind of what to us looks like an inverted heater shield. It's round at the top, flat at the bottom. Sometimes I call it the slice of bread shield. It's just with these ones, they've just made them longer, which I guess facilitates block fighting, which is what the whole classic holdover of Warhammer is. So yeah,
I think like if you were, it doesn't quite fit because I feel like these weapons and armor was meant to be what they used before they were skeletons, right? But I think a shield is probably the best piece of armor for a skeleton. And a massive shield, doubly so, because they're not running anywhere anyway. We know that. So they're not like encumbered in the way that living people are, because they're animated by magic, not by the strength of their muscles. So having an extremely heavy large shield is good because they're also quite sluggish in combat and not great fighters. So you want something that is just difficult to get around, whether the guy behind it is actually any good or not. And finally, actually, skeletons are supposed to be vulnerable to blunt force trauma, and we know that blunt force trauma can travel through armor anyway. So if you put a mail shirt on a skeleton, it's not actually going to protect him any or very much. Whereas a shield will soak that up a lot more effectively. So I think massive shields would be a very good piece of armor for a skeleton to have. Go on.
I was gonna say one thing that I'm sad about this artwork is it doesn't have chariots, which is the other thing that I think they really nailed with the Tomb King's range, is like the light firing platform chariot or shooting platform chariot that appears in a lot of ancient Egyptian kind of wall art and descriptions.
And a lot of war games, kind of the chariots are shock assault, plow in and use the sides on the wheels kind of thing, whereas actually it seems that chariots were kind of treated a bit more like APCs or light cavalry, you know, as you said, like being used as mobile shooting platforms. So
it's something that a lot of war games suffer from, unfortunately, is that the scale and size of the board that you're playing over doesn't really allow for the same kind of light cavalry, light chariot tactics that you would probably historically have seen, which is unfortunate and one of the disadvantages of playing a game that in the end is more about looking awesome than it is about having some kind of accurate historical recreation.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to chariots, I mean, as you say, you've got the light, fast platforms, which are the Egyptian style ones. You've got the battle taxis, which are Celtic, Northern European, heroic age Greece. I mean, the Odyssey. You've got the various kings being ferried in and out of their chariots. The whole sort of iron scythes and charged sort of heavy battle chariots. That seems to be kind of a Northern Levant, very restricted period where those are used. They're already dying out by the sort of the Persian era because there's quite a number of rather interesting counters to them. But I think that, as you said, it's difficult to get actual chariot tactics on a tabletop war game, and I think, to be honest, the only way you could realistically represent chariots, especially the kind of lighter, fast chariots that you should have with the Tomb King's army, would be as like maybe some kind of optional transport for your characters, because then they're functioning to drop off the elite warriors to the needed point by giving them a speed boost. But then that's an awful lot of model for what's essentially just a +6 to movement every turn until you get off and fight. Especially when you've got stuff like undead dragons, which happen to go faster and hit harder.
There's some historical war games for things like mounted archers and like the 100 Years' War and the Wars of the Roses. Model that with like pre-game moves and that sort of things, and just do away with the idea you don't need to model the horses. Like, everybody knows that these guys rode up on horses, they got off, and now they're fighting, so just do the move on with your life, kind of thing. But again, that means that you don't get to put your chariots on the battlefield and they look cool.
The Lizard Viking in the chat says 28mm does not really lend itself to large-scale battles, sadly. And I think that's true. I think in some of the older versions of Warhammer, they did talk about how individual models might actually represent, like 100 troops or something like that. That never really sat well with me. I just preferred to imagine that, like, in this particular world, like, just armies and that were basically smaller than in the real world. But yeah.
They would have had to have done like a Warhammer Fantasy version of Epic.
You mean Warmaster?
To get that up.
Yeah.
Warmaster, I think is one of the best games they ever wrote, but that's a topic for another day.
I think I probably can do one more, and then I have to skedaddle.
Okay. All right.
Have you on?
Cool. Let's do one more then. Oh, Alex. Alex, Brettonians.
Yeah.
Do you want to start us off on this then?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, flying Pegasus Knights aside, I would say probably the Brettonians are one of the ones that it's easiest to lock down a historical inspiration period for, because they are very blatantly 14th century. Although with some slightly questionable choices for the higher ups, because you've got, obviously, well, as we can see here, the knights of varying descriptions. Everybody in Bretonnia gets a great helm, apparently, and most of them get what's recognizably not complete plate, as in it doesn't have the internal articulated layers that you get later on, but it's anyone who's been to a 14th century reenactment event or living history event will recognize an awful lot of the armor they stick on them. I just always found it highly amusing that some of the really high ranking Brettonians wandered around just in mail as if they'd stepped out of the Battle of Hastings. But yeah, broadly, I mean, and heck, they've even got you've got the archer formations, the peasant archers, which are honestly, Gov, we are not Battle of Poitiers reenactors, and so forth. The barding, depending on the model and the artwork, I think is probably the one thing that kind of veers quite haphazardly across the time periods, depending because obviously 14th century you've got no barding to male barding to partial plate barding, and some of the horses are maybe taking some of the units and characters take it a little bit further than that, into 15th century and onwards. But I'd say it's probably it's the faction that from an identifiable time period is probably sticking the closest to, even down to the rather massive and ridiculous head crests they've all stuck on their great helms. I think that's the one thing. Now, back when I was a kid, I was like, "Oh, extra thing to paint. This looks cool." Picking them all different colors. Now I'm looking at it and going, "Yeah, this is the bit you take off before you go into battle. We know who you are. Wear a normal bassinet now."
Yeah,
but rule of cool.
Well, yeah, and it's very much that thing that we sometimes talk about in reenactment and living history, where you're like, try not to always wear the most exciting thing from the artwork, because that's not what everybody's wearing all the time. You want to represent some kind of normalcy, and then the Brettonian kind of aesthetic veers completely the other way, and it's like, no, the most ridiculous things that you can see in the art, everybody does that all the time.
Yeah.
And
and I think the Perry twins sculpted the 5th edition Brettonians, which was kind of when the range really became a range.
Well, they weren't really a faction before that.
Yeah, they were just kind of talked about, and there were a few models. I kind of feel like these no, sorry, I heard a rumor that basically they wanted to sculpt a more historical, like a historical knights range, and they were like, "Look, we do all of these. You can cast them up as long as but we want to do them." So they set the design language themselves, and that's how it got rooted very much in the 14th century. I don't know how true that is, but it is. For those people who don't know, the Perry twins, who are legendary Games Workshop sculptors, they now have their own historical war games company, and they have been reenactors and very much interested in medieval history themselves. So the armor of certainly the 5th edition Brettonians was very much rooted in history, and then it got a bit more weird and wacky as it went on, as Games Workshop has tended to do.
I was going to say it's no coincidence really that the 5th edition Men at Arms the Games Workshop sells, and the 5th edition French infantry that the Perry sculpted for War Games Foundry are almost completely interchangeable, and in some cases impossible to distinguish unless you know very small details you're looking for.
Yeah,
because they're essentially the same.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, I absolutely love the closest knight to us who's swinging his mace or censer. He's very definitely into his branded product placement. I've been counting. There are 8 different shields or mini shields of various descriptions all over him and his horse, and assuming that he's mirror imaging like the one on the horse's front left leg, and on the actual horse itself. That's like at least a dozen separate coats of arms. It's like you are not mistaking any part. It's like this guy could be minced by an undead dragon, and you'd still know what every single part of the remains belong to.
Absolutely.
Which, to be fair, I mean, it's probably overselling it slightly, but it's not exactly too far off some of the more eccentric 14th century.
I mean, even thinking about some of the late 15th century heraldic surcoats that you see in things like the Beacham pageant, you've got like the main arms on the livery, and then you have the sleeves with the extra panels, and And then the guy's also carrying a banner which has got the
Mm.
same thing on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, he might get separated from his horse. He wants to make sure that everything's the same. Hello, YJ, by the way. YJ in the comments saying hello to everyone. So, hi. And of course, Pegasus Knights and Hippogriffs and unicorns not existing in our world, but the medieval knights would definitely be riding them if they could.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
There are some gorgeous sketches of some leather barding, which we don't know if it was ever made, but I would imagine they probably did. But some leather barding for tournament and parade that basically turned the horses into Pegasi or dragons and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I must admit, playing Total War Warhammer and Warhammer 2, Pegasus Knights were some of my favorite units because I just made a hilariously broken mob of about 6 or 7 of the various, like as you say, Griffin Knights and Pegasus Knights and everything. Just stacked them all with the Emperor with ridiculous amounts of buffs, and I just like, where's the enemy HQ? I'm flying over the rest of you peasants and just multi-bombing. It was like I'd reinvented the Stuka, except more feathery and with more lances. It's like, what's that? The greater Zinchian demon leading Archaon's second army. Oh no! It would be such a shame if you got drowned in Pegasus Knights.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it would change tactics as much as like Warhammer is kind of based around the tactics of the historical world. Having the access to flying troop types would change things. Even things like would castles actually work? You know, just a bunch of your elite knights can just drop into the middle of the enemy castle whenever they want.
Yeah.
We've got more people saying hello. We've got Dewey saying hello from Virginia, USA. We've got Josh saying hello. Guys, the Brettonians. Are either of you going to get a Brettonian harness in the chat? Let us know which of the ones we talked about so far. What do you think, guys?
I mean, I'd love to, especially because, as I said, to be honest, you could get a decent 14th century harness, and it wouldn't take too many adaptations to make it Brettonian. I dread to think of the total weight you'd be adding to everything. You probably would end up realistically in fulfilling the trope of, oh no, I've fallen over, I can't get up again. Especially if you had one of those big winged headpieces got stuck in the mud or something. But they are absolutely gorgeous models, and I think if I ever put together a LARP armor, I would probably definitely go Brettonian.
Yeah.
I just wish they'd redone a few more of the miniatures for the re-release. I mean, I'll still collect them, but when you, I think we've gotten a bit spoilt with the model density per sprue of more recent GW releases, and then you get the Brettonian re-release, and you pick up a sprue that's the size of an A4 piece of paper, and you're like, there are 5 guys on here.
Yeah. I just looking at the stuff that they did resculpt, I think just shows, as much as the old models were nice, it just shows how far they've come, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's surprising how well the old ones hold up.
Yeah.
They're not awful, which is more than you can say for a lot of other GW models of about the same period when you compare them to their newest iterations.
Yeah. And certainly they've been sensible in what they've chosen to redo. So they've remade your kind of your centerpiece models, haven't they? So those are the ones that people are going to pick up and look at, whereas the rank and file are the old sculpts. Nick, what's your thoughts on the Brettonian armor that we see here?
I like it. I'm particularly pleased that they brought back Brettonian Knights on Foot for this re-release, because they were a cool thing, I thought, in 5th edition that kind of disappeared in sixth edition and forward. But yeah, I think that 14th century harness has like an aesthetic appeal in itself. There's like a simplicity to its construction and its lines that makes it feel, it's like in the same way that there's something iconic about like a Mark 1 tank. And I think that 14th century armor, those early true plate armors, there's like an iconic look about them that even though your later period armors are more refined and have articulation and fit and all of this sort of thing, they just don't have that statement that I think that a lot of these Brettonian models make with their armor.
There's a utilitarian aggressiveness to a 14th century harness, I feel.
Yes.
There's a lot less sculptural elements to it, and I think the Brettonians kind of cover that well, where it's there to protect them, and it's not flashy in the way that even the Empire foot troops had flashy elements that were literally just there as decoration. I mean, obviously there's the coats of arms and everything, but like there's no fluting, there's no sculptural stuff to the armor. I like the Brettonian stuff. I do want a 14th century harness at some point, but it's way down the list. If I was going to LARP or cosplay it in Warhammer, for me it's kind of almost too realistic. Do you know what I mean? Like,
people might think you're actually trying to do serious reenactment and have slightly overwrought it, rather than going, "Oh, that's obviously fantasy."
Like, am I reenacting slightly badly, or am I a Brettonian knight? Who knows? So there we go, Brettonians. I'm really excited. Alex, get your army painted. I've got a Chaos army in the works, and we'll get together and have a battle.
I'll send you the date for the event that I'm going to run later in the year.
Great.
Well, if we're at Tewkesbury, I mean, hopefully we'll have a battle before then. But if we're at Tewkesbury, we could have an evening rematch.
Sounds good.
6x4 in my new kitchen shed. Yep, sounds good.
All right, I need to head off. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, see you soon. Bye.
Bye. Right.
What have you got for me now?
That's only 3 through.
Oh.
We're gonna have to speed up if we're gonna get through all of these. Here we have Orcs and Goblins. There's so many different styles in the Orcs and Goblin army. It's really hard. It was really hard to like think of, for me, what was like the iconic art piece, which is why there's 2 for a start.
Yeah. There's
no.
I think it's mostly represented by the artwork on the left, but there's the series of models which are kind of the precursor to the Age of Sigmar Ironjawz range, which are now back as Black Orcs, which I think is kind of an iconic armor if you're talking about arms and armor for the Orcs, which has definitely got that kind of brutalist plate armor look.
Yeah. And a lot of the early ones certainly had lots of kind of horned helmets and stuff, didn't they?
Horned helmets, patchy mail, leather scale, very barbarian, sort of Hollywood barbarian.
Yeah.
Cross sort of vibes going on.
So this, for me, and I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, for me, this is the first one that we've looked at tonight that I feel has got a very strong aesthetic to it, but actually is very impractical to the point of probably not actually working.
Yes, I think a lot of the less so on the goblin side actually. I think much of the Warhammer goblin, leaving aside the massively oversized spearheads that Alex pointed out earlier, but just like, you know, spears and shields and little mail shirts or skull caps or whatever, all that seems completely reasonable. Not sure about hoods. Like wearing hoods up like that, probably not great for your peripheral vision, but certainly a lot of the orc armor, particularly with the extra spikes and shapes and bolted on bits, yeah, feels very, very impractical, and like you would be fighting against your own armor as much as you're fighting against the opposition.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a certain, you can still see there's some things like, for example, the armor on the orc, and with a lot of them, it seems based on kind of the Roman segmentata kind of shoulder pieces.
Yeah.
But there's very little in the way of actual shaping, and the plates are still very, very large, much wider than you would have on an actual segmentata. So, yeah, it's a strong look, and it really gets across the attitude and the character of the army. But as far as, you know, kind of being rooted in history and being a practical armor, I don't even know that lore-wise the orcs would be able to fight with this kind of armor.
Yeah, and I know that there's probably some people who watch this video who'll get very angry, but certainly the newer orc armors that they put together for their Age of Sigmar range certainly all look like they will work a lot better, particularly in sort of the leg and knee articulation or that kind of thing, than a lot of the early sculpts.
Yeah.
But I think that the early sculpts, there's like the simplicity of the armor means that they're actually like a nicer model overall, and certainly they're nicer to paint.
Yes, the simplicity is useful when painting. Full disclosure, I like both games. I like both Age of Sigmar and Warhammer Fantasy. I think it's great that there's now enough room in their design studio and on their shelves for both.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think the Old World is a really, really, like, I think I've played 5 games of the Old World now, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I mean, it's not been out a huge length of time. It feels like a really nice battle game and really emphasizes my opinion on Age of Sigmar. That Age of Sigmar is a really fun game, but it's not a battle game. It's a video game with miniatures, and that's fine, and that's really enjoyable, but it's not a battle game. That's what Warhammer is. We've got back.
Yeah, it's large scale skirmish for me, where I feel Age of Sigmar is. Lizard Viking says the problem with the current Iron Jaws in Age of Sigmar is the awful yellow color scheme they decided to be the default one. Yeah, it's not a choice that I would have made. I feel like sometimes those choices are made based on previous choices rather than whether it's the best choice for that model or that army. Because when you've got, like, the heavy metal team is painting one of each of the armies, right? And it needs to have an iconic look to it. And basically, I think some of the other colors are already taken. So yeah, I think sometimes they make choices where if we were just collecting one army, we wouldn't make that choice. But because they have to paint all the armies, they need to have a instantly recognizable different look for each one. They can't just do everything with a red and green color scheme or whatever it might be. Yeah.
It is interesting that for some of their armies, they have changed their color scheme in order to make them more beginner friendly.
Mm-hmm.
There is a reason why Ultramarines no longer have yellow shoulder trim on blue backgrounds, and why Stormcast are metallic.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that could be a whole other series of videos.
It could. we could talk about that for a while. I think one of the interesting things about orcs, let's get back to this.
Yes.
Is that while being very humanoid, there are some distinctive qualities to their anatomy which will make the armor design somewhat different. And I think the biggest thing that is standing out to me here is that the orc head comes out of the front of the shoulders, not above. And so having these wide horns on the edge of the helmet actually would work better for a human than it would for an orc.
It would catch less, yes.
So yeah, I think that's something might be worth some discussion when it comes to redesigning stuff for the orc range. I know they've already done it, but and yeah, I think that, well, maybe that's the reason why we see fewer of these kind of barbarian style helmets in more modern sculpts, because it does give. I've been thinking about doing a video on this for a while. There's kind of an uncanny valley when it comes to armor. So the uncanny valley of there's something wrong about that, and I'm not quite sure what it is.
Yes.
I think even if people don't have working knowledge of armor, there are certain things where they will be able to look at something and go, I'm not quite sure, but that doesn't look like it's going to work.
Yeah.
And I think something like this is a good example of that, where the helmet design is obviously going for this really strong barbarian look, and it might not be clear straight away what is quite wrong with it, but there's something about it that's a little bit jarring, and we know in our brain that it wouldn't quite work for that character. Well, Nick, you've recently painted up an Orc and Goblin army.
Yes.
Would you want some actual Orc and Goblin armor of the Warhammer variety, or?
I was going to say, of the Warhammer vibe, not so much. I mean, I have been making armor for Empire Orcs, but that has, for many reasons, a very different aesthetic and feel to it. Partially because you got to wear it and fight in it.
Yeah. And you have a human physiology rather than a Warhammer Orc physiology.
Rather than a Warhammer Orc physiology, yes. I also I was going to say, I think for a lot of the armors that are represented in the Warhammer Orc and Goblin range, I think I would lean more heavily into like the Goblin equipment and armor than the Orc armor. Although the sort of brutalist slab plate armor that some of those Black Orcs have is pretty tempting.
Yeah.
Were I a hulking mass of green muscle that could cope with wearing it.
Yep. Yeah, I've always had a respect for the Orc and Goblin designs. I think there's such a strong design language and everything. But personally, it's been the army that I've been least drawn to. I think it just doesn't fit with my style. So
I do think as well there's three very distinct periods of Orc and Goblin design with the Warhammer thing. That you have the early, Kev Adams base designs. You have the sort of middle Hammer, which a lot of this art represents that was kind of kicked off with the Brian Nelson in early end of 5th, early 6th edition. And then you have like the modern Age of Sigmar Orc designs, which is kind of hinted at in the sort of 6th, 7th edition period with just the Black Orcs that then moved into what they've done now. And each of those has like sometimes not even subtly different designs for how the army goes together. I think that's a great thing, because it means that you can, if there's one aesthetic of Orcs that you really, really like, there was a period that kind of matches that.
Yeah. Good. All right. Let's go on to High Elves.
Is that Warhammer art, or is that art by somebody about Warhammer? I've seen this art a couple of times now.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I chose this because it had kind of a nice wide-ish variety of troop types. The one that I initially was planning on using was, the
Is it the cover
of
the 4th edition book?
No, it's not. I need to find it now and show you. High Elves are
aesthetically perfect. Yes.
Yeah. Just move on. Done. Guys in the chat, what are your opinion on High Elves? I think, there's a real kind of, at the same time as there being no really meaningful change in the High Elf aesthetic over the years, there has been a certain amount of I'm struggling to think of how I should put this. It's had a really strong aesthetic from the start of Warhammer.
Yes.
And it hasn't changed very much. But there has been a honing from the original kind of the 2nd edition miniatures, that were, I think, actually released under the Marauder line.
I have one of those bolt throwers. Yeah.
Every troop type has been recognizable. Like, you can pick up a Marauder miniature and you can go, right, I know what this is.
Yeah.
In modern Warhammer, which kind of fits with the idea of the High Elves, in that they basically are meant to be wearing the same armor that they were using thousands of years ago, because they perfected it and now they don't want to change.
Yeah. I don't disagree, but I do think there has been a pushing, or like a more, they have made the characteristics that separated and identified the different High Elf troop types and High Elves as a range as a whole have become more extreme over time.
Yep.
And I think that has lent some of the armors and some of the designs of the figures to become less practical and in some ways less interesting, even though there's more going on. An example to me would be when you compare the sort of 4th and 5th edition Swordmasters and the plastics that they made during 7th edition. The shoulders are bigger, the helmets are taller, the swords are feel larger in the scale of the rest of the model, and make the whole model feel a little bit less practical despite the fact that it's more high elf, if that makes sense. Same with the Phoenix Guard, like the halberds are bigger, the wings on the heads are bigger, you know, the lion pelts got bigger on the white lions. All of these sorts of things, like those aesthetic features were pushed to an extreme, and it's not necessarily a criticism, but it did kind of break some of the practicality that was represented in some of the older art things that they had.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the high elf models were held back from the true intention of the range by the technology of the time. And I think that the art captured the what they were going for a lot better than the not necessarily the sculpting technology, but the casting technology of the time was able to do.
Yes. I mean, and there is a reason that, like, leaving aside some of the design cues that I didn't like, the high elves in Age of Sigmar, who's Lumineth, they go the Lumineth realm mods, they're really nice.
Yeah.
And they definitely feel like you've pushed that high elf thing to an even further extreme.
Yeah.
I guess the question with the high elves is not like, would you want to go into battle wearing these armors? And which of the 3 special infantry troops would you want to be, or would you want to be a dragon prince?
I mean, the easy answer would be dragon prince. To be honest, I'd be happy even with basic spearman kit.
Yeah.
Like, I would wear any of these armors.
Yeah.
Like right away. My one concern would be whether or not the helmets being that tall would create a problem. But I don't think it would necessarily. So I was thinking through this when we decided on our topic. I was thinking through this, and I thought, well, actually, if you look at the Napoleonics
oh yes,
troopers, some of them do wear very tall hats. And the law of the high elves is that basically their armor weighs practically nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't see a problem with the height of the helmet. Now, some of them are ridiculous in like the wings and stuff like that. But I mean, it was very funny to me when people were complaining about the ridiculousness of the helmets of the Lumineth, and I was like, "Have you seen the Phoenix Guard?
Yeah.
Like, have you seen them? Because they are just as ridiculous." Yeah.
Well, there was the cow thing as well, right, with the Lumineth, right?
Yeah.
But,
yeah, and I think that was jarring for people. Was like, but it should be phoenixes and dragons.
They're coming.
But you know, again, there's a lovely 3rd edition sculpt where the guy's got deer antlers.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I thought it was the 4th. I thought it was a 5th ed sculpt
with metal.
Yeah.
I thought it was 3rd.
It might be. I don't know. I've probably got one in a box down here.
I can't find the picture that I was thinking of. It's a lovely black and white ink drawing of an archer and a spearman, and it's in the 4th edition Warhammer Armies book. That was the one that I was thinking of, but I couldn't find it.
Is it this one?
That's the one. Yeah. When I think of high elves, that's what I think of. The Lizard Viking says, "Isn't the one that I'm showing? Isn't that Warhammer Total War art?" It could be.
I will say, when I think about high elves, the piece of art that I always think of first of all is this one.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
But yes, high elf aesthetic, very good. Happy with any of that armor. Sword masters are the way forward.
Okay, so you
because parrying cannonballs is cool.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's great, and you can imagine them doing it as well. That would just be incredible.
That's what you want to see in a Warhammer movie, right? It's just a sword master just casually parrying a cannonball.
Yeah. Even stuff like Shadow Warriors. The Shadow Warriors are really just great. YJ says, what about, so with a high helmet like that, what about leverage on your neck if it's hit? I don't think that it would be that much of a problem because of the shape of the helmet. Because it's conical, I think that if you were hit up here, your neck wouldn't need to move very far for the weapon to slide off. So that's what I would say to that. Maybe we need to do some tests with stuff like this. That would be an excellent way to spend time and money making accurate copies of high elf armor and then testing it. Yeah. So I don't think the standard helmet would be a problem. I think what this is basically doing, and we said at the beginning about how Warhammer is basically our world but fantasy, is this is taking a early medieval armor, so Viking age to 11th century kind of thing. You've got conical helmets, you've got hauberks and things like that, and just turning it to 11, giving it a more glamorous vibe to it.
Well, and that's grounded in the some of the early Tolkien descriptions of what Tolkien elves are like: conical helms, long scale armors that weigh nothing, all of this sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's like, these descriptions, they say his tall helm, his high helm kind of thing, and it is just taking that and going and running with it and going, right. Obviously Tolkien was probably not imagining this. The guys writing the sagas weren't thinking about this kind of helm, but they were thinking of the Spangan helm or the conical nasal helm, but this is taking that and mythologizing it. Lizard Viking says, the bow the Sisters of Avalon have looks stupid though. They should have just had a richly decorated ordinary bow and just have magic arrows they shoot. I mean,
Sisters of Avalon shouldn't have had bows. They should have had spears like the handmaidens had.
Yeah. I convert it. I just do whatever. I love converting stuff, so that sort of thing is generally not a problem for me. I did give one of those magical bows to my Wood Elf Dragon Rider because I wanted her to have a magical bow. So it's cool to have the option, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it's not your aesthetic, change it. That's the great thing about this. Over things like computer games and things like that, although obviously you can mod computer games if you're on a PC, is the ability to go, I don't like that weapon, chop, do something neat. Right. We should have ended on high elves because we did say that they are the greatest, so we will have to speed up as we go through these.
The aesthetic of Beastmen is really solid as well.
Yeah. And it's iconically Warhammer.
Yes.
I'm disappointed that some of the earliest Warhammer stuff isn't kind of included in Beastmen, in that it has kind of gone to you've the more regimented thing of you got your ungors and they look like this, and you got your gores and they look like this, you got your minotaurs, and it's kind of that kind of riles against the initial idea of Beastmen, where you read the old Conrad books and stuff like that, and you've got like fish-headed guys and all sorts. But I understand from a miniature making company, the idea, like, you can't actually do chaos the way that it's described in the
No,
lore in this.
or even some of the way that the art is. I actually think that it's one of the weird things about how you look at things as a human, because like the Beastman army should be absolutely crazy with the different figures, but then you start putting together a unit and you've used all these cool, like each figure you've picked like 20 different figures to represent your gores. They're all like Beastmen of the appropriate size with all of these cool different things and all of this sort of thing, and each of them individually is a cool model, and you line it up into a unit of 20 and you're like, well, this looks ridiculous.
Yeah,
because you're expecting a unit on the battlefield to have some kind of uniform look to it, which you just don't get. But it's really hard to talk about kind of the arms and armor of Beastmen because they're so kind of out there.
Yeah.
In just their general design and aesthetic.
Although I feel like it would work better than the orc designs.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like on the one hand, they're wearing less armor often than a lot of the orcs. But they do use plausible armor designs for the armor that they are using. You can see in the helmets that these guys are wearing are very much based on kind of horse chamfrons, and and they're armoring certain parts of them, but not all parts, obviously. But there's nothing over bits that would stop movement, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also I like the aesthetic of the kind of rough shield construction.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it feels like it would just be a one use.
Yeah.
This is to get you to them. Use this to stop the arrows, then ditch it and just use your hands.
And I've tried, don't want to talk too much, but in Old World, I think Beastmen are one of the most interesting factions from a rules perspective. There is so much going on there.
Yeah. I think one of the great things about all of these armies is that from the very, very early days of Warhammer, they have had an incredibly strong aesthetic that has stuck. And you look at the army and you can pick up any model in that army and you know what that army is about. Like, it just drips of the story.
Yes.
And I think that what Age of Sigmar, certainly towards the beginning, there was a certain amount of confusion over what the armies were doing and what they were. So a perfect example is there was a lot of confusion over what the Stormcast were, whether they were golems or whether was there actually a human inside that armor, and that sort of thing. And yeah, they didn't. they have a strong aesthetic, but it didn't really tell the story quite as clearly
Mm.
as as maybe the more recent miniatures do.
Yeah.
You know, the Stormcast were meant to be a unit of elite troops, humans, but like super powerful humans who strike hard and strike fast. And I think that the Thunderstrike armor does that and looks the part a lot more than the initial ones. But I think certainly in this era of Warhammer Fantasy art, the sculptors and the artists had got the look of each army down, and you can look at this piece of art and you know what the Beastmen are about. You
Yeah.
know,
So this is 7th edition art again, right?
yeah. 2010. It says
Yeah.
copyright
So 7th, yeah.
20. Yeah. Are you wearing this armor, Nick? Is this an armor set that you're going to get?
I don't have the upper body physique to make this armor work.
No, I think our good friend John might be able to pull it off.
Yes.
But I think not quite for us. I like it, but yeah, it's and it's more practical than the orcs, but not for me. Not for me. Wood elves.
I think this art's from Total War Warhammer.
This one is, yes. But in my defense, it was very difficult to find
Wood Elf art.
wood elf art because it's a lot of it is just kind of a few scouts in the wood, you know, running around in the trees. They're not really wearing a lot of armor.
I think there's also definitely been two distinct eras of wood elves.
Yeah.
There was basically everything up to, I think it was the 7th edition, but like 7th edition range release had one kind of subdued forest kind of almost ancient British tribal feel.
Yeah.
And then post that, there was kind of the more sort of high elves, but we live in the woods feel.
Okay.
So personally, I feel like there was a very clear change in aesthetic direction for the wood elves.
Yeah, I think the wood elves have been one that they've gone backwards and forwards on because I think they have struggled to work out what the wood elves are compared to the high elves and the dark elves. Because lore-wise, they should fight very, very differently to basically any other elf army. You shouldn't really have big blocks of infantry.
Well,
lining up.
They're one of the few factions, I think, in Warhammer that don't make sense as a battle faction.
Yeah. And I think that has caused them to kind of go backwards and forwards. When I first started, I remember, big blocks of 20 wood elf spearmen, and that just doesn't make sense from a lore perspective,
Yeah. I think the sort of the look that they have for the majority of their infantry, with like layered leather armor, cloaks, hoods, I like that. The cavalry that exist just doesn't fit with the rest of the vibe for me. And I don't know. I just feel like it's a range and like an aesthetic that it doesn't land for me as a whole. I would go into battle wearing the layered leather, the cloaks, these kinds of things. If I was doing the Way Watcher, the hide in the trees and shoot, like they have that very Robin Hood aesthetic to some of their design, but the sort of the lunatic stag riders and sorts of things that doesn't land for me.
Yeah, I think they might do well to kind of segment the army a bit more, as it were, because you've got kind of these different flavors of wood elves that they've kind of gone backwards and forwards on. But if they embraced it and kind of gave you like almost these different sides to the army within the army, like what they've done with Brettonians, where they've gone, right, you've got peasants and they work like this, and knights and they work like this. You've kind of got the wild hunt idea, Kurnos and the wild hunt. Then you've got like the way watchers and scouts, and like the more considered and sensible elven approach, but like the sneaky elves. So you've got the wild hunt elves, you've got the sneaky elves, and then you've got the forest spirits. And I think you could probably do something around that where maybe you like choose your theme for your army. You could get a bit creative with that. And that could work into the aesthetic as well.
I will say, and I know that this miniature is not an old world, but it was a Warhammer model before it was an Age of Sigmar model, if I remember right. The Alariel model is 10 out of 10, no notes. Fantastic model.
The Alariel, the one on the stag beetle. Yeah, she's incredible. She's over there. She's on my shelf.
10 out of 10.
Yep. No complaints.
Yeah.
And the tree men, the plastic tree men that Tree Lords in Age of Sigmar, also some incredible models. But it just kind of feels like some miniatures, they kind of weren't really sure where they were going and what theme they wanted. Right. Also really, iconic.
Yes. I just, before I was kind of expecting dwarfs to be next, but it's fine. Because the Lizard Viking is talking about Slayer armies and like the AOS design. And so the aesthetic for the Fire Slayers in AOS, there are two things that would make that range orders of magnitude better. One, have them wear trousers so that you're not just painting skin the whole time, and they would look way better. And two, it needs a unit that isn't dudes on foot or a giant monster. It needs something in between. And then I think the range makes perfect sense and is fine. But the way it is right now, which is just generic guys on foot with no clothes and a big lizard, it's not a great range, not a great army. It doesn't really sell for me.
I think
Chaos Warriors.
Well, should we jump forwards to dwarves as we?
Sure. We can talk dwarves and come back to chaos.
So the Slayers have been again an iconic part of Warhammer lore, but I think, kind of maybe going off what the Lizard Viking was saying, I think stuff like that works well as part of a larger army to give you the difference. So the Slayers are so cool because you understand that they are like the elite of the dwarves, like the crazy berserkers of the dwarves. And it's not that every dwarf is like this, it's that these are those guys. Yeah. And you don't get that if everyone in the whole army is a slayer. In the same way, if you had entirely longbeards, then suddenly, not longbeards, sorry, what are the iron ones?
Iron breakers.
Iron breakers. If you had an entire army of iron breakers, then suddenly no one is the heavy armored dude. Everyone's just a normal dude, right? And so having a wide variety of units that have their separate aesthetic and have their own individual design choices that differentiate them from other stuff is really helpful as a design language, because it tells you what this unit is for before you even look at what the rules are. And the rules should follow that.
Yeah, otherwise you end up with your ludo-narrative dissonance, which is an awful experience in gaming, and unfortunately is rife in tabletop fantasy gaming.
Yeah. So you should be able... So when you look at a Warhammer army, hopefully you look at the individual units and you go, I have no idea what the rules are, but these guys are going to be the guys that are taking the hit, and these are the guys who are going to hit back. You know, these are the fast guys. This is my hero. You should be able to see that without looking at the army list. And I think that bad play experiences are most often a result of ludonarrative dissonance, where a unit plows into your unit and you go, right, let's go, and then like your heavily armored unit gets blown out of the water.
Yeah.
Or their weak looking unit just absolutely totals you.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's...
Or your massive giant has no damage on his stick.
Yeah. Yeah. And it should... The rules should be connected to what the miniature looks like. And if you don't have different unit types and different designs within an army, then it's very difficult to make it clear, especially to new players, what each unit should be doing.
Yeah.
But the dwarves have that. They've got loads of unit types. And a strong Scandi aesthetic as well.
I was going to say, they're one of those armies from Warhammer that has such an iconic aesthetic that's tied to like a group of real world historic cultures and kind of armor and equipment. I like it. It's like the sort of Saxon, Germanic, Scandinavian thing. You've got this heavy layered mail and some plate armor going on, you know, you'll piece together helmets, but they also have that same feeling that the high elves do, that they've taken one aspect of and kind of iterated on it. And I think that fits very nicely with the stories that the army is trying to tell, and as you say, like the different types of unit. A friend of mine has a dwarf army, and I've played lots of games against dwarf army through various editions of Warhammer. It is still sometimes difficult to tell the difference between a unit of dwarf warriors with hand weapons and shields and a unit of slightly different dwarf warriors that have longer beards and hand weapons and shields, and a slightly different unit of dwarf warriors that have got slightly heavy armor and hand weapons and shields, and this unit of dwarf warriors that has, you know, handguns, and this unit of dwarf warriors that's got hand cannons. But once you tune in to the aesthetic differences that mark those units out, it does work.
Yeah, and I think that as time went on, they actually developed that more.
Yes.
So the later Ironbreaker models are more clearly more heavily armored than you see with the earlier stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although also some of the later dwarf models suffered from that same thing that some of those later high elf models did, where I felt like sometimes they pushed the aesthetic a bit too far.
Yep.
Like you didn't have to have runic decoration on every piece of armor on the model.
No. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, designed for the sculptor, not the painter.
Yes.
Or the display painter, not the army painter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Nick, would you wear an armor such as this?
Yeah, I think I would. I'm still not a massive fan of, shorthand weapon and shield as just like an effective battlefield situation. It's one of the things that I really feel is kind of missing from the dwarf design, and understand why they made that decision, but I really wish you could have dwarves with spears.
Yeah.
I think that would be really cool. And I know that they made the decision early on in Warhammer that dwarves didn't use swords and spears. We left those for elves.
Yeah.
But it would be cool.
Yeah.
Dwarf pikemen, please.
It would make sense I guess you could say, if they're used to fighting in tunnels.
Spears are useful in tunnels. Like no, I get that, but just there is something that feels like you're talking about, like being able to tell what an army does. It feels very strange that an army that has no cavalry does not have any traditional anti-cavalry weapons on its melee troops.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, I think like with any of these ones that are very clearly linked to a historical armor, from a practical point of view, I'd wear an armor like this. There's nothing wrong with it.
You're basically making an armor like this.
Yeah, well, slightly, yeah. Yeah. So it's all good. It's nicely done. Right. I think this is the last one. I think we've done 8. Here we go. Chaos Warriors. Rice Brown says, logically, the smaller races should move towards longer polearms. Yeah. I think. Yeah.
Halflings with pikes.
Makes sense. It does.
Chaos, man.
Chaos.
It's just the coolest and most metal armor, and it is so unbelievably impractical.
Yeah. This was kind of because the guys that made these models understood what real armor looked like.
Yes.
So anything wrong with this armor is a design choice.
Yeah, it's completely intentional.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree.
It's going like, we know what historical armor looked like. These guys are from heavy metal album covers.
Yes.
They're not from the 15th century. They are from
These guys forged their armor in the fires of hell.
Yeah.
Of course it's ridiculous. Yeah.
So
you don't have to worry about whether the articulation works. It's literally fused to their flesh. It's fine.
Yeah. It's not a problem. And they probably don't care about whether or not they can raise their arm above their head to block an incoming headshot, because they're too busy tearing your legs off with their bare hands.
Yeah, and beating you to death with the wet end. Yeah.
Just again, the design language here is so strong. No one is looking at these guys and no one is confused about what they are about.
Yep.
It's very clear that they are going to burn your houses, They are going to burn your wives. They are
Yep.
going to burn everything that you own, and that's if you're lucky. Yeah, the thing, and this is more to do with like army composition and stuff like that. The thing that I think Chaos armies needed was just more marauders. As in, you read the books, and Chaos Warriors are like the standard Chaos Warrior. It's like 1 in 100 marauders make it that far.
Yeah.
Right. And then the Chaos Chosen are even harder to get to that point. And there were a lot of Warhammer armies that were Chaos Warriors, and very, you put Marauders in if you didn't have enough points.
Yeah.
So my Chaos army is going to be mostly Marauders, and then a few Chosen.
Well, here's the thing: if they made nicer Marauder models, then
yes,
I would be all in on that. But those models,
yeah, and I think that it's basically as well down to just the actual strength of the Chaos Warrior design.
Yes.
Like, how are you going to make a Marauder model that is as appealing as this ridiculous, basically very clearly evil knight?
And there's a thing that like a lot of people don't like painting skin, and you don't have to paint skin if you're painting Chaos Warriors.
Nope, that's true.
You
can see the Terry English Excalibur armors in here.
Oh yes, absolutely.
But improved. I feel like the Chaos Warriors have kind of taken that and improved upon that design language. Yeah. What can I say more than what I've said? Would you wear this armor though, Nick? Would you put on a possessed Chaos Warrior armor?
Not personally, no. But had I reached the unhinged state of a Chaos Warrior, I feel like I would, like, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I wouldn't choose to. I love the design choices. I love that it's very clearly all thoughts through. Like, everything is in the right place. It's just it wouldn't be an armor that I would want to own personally, even though I also have a Chaos army.
You don't want a cloak made of flayed skin?
Nope. No, not for me. Not for me. But there we have it. So to recap, I think Alex, who was with us at the start, if you haven't seen the whole of the stream, Alex was with us at the start. I think he was saying he would very much go for a Brettonian armor, if any. In fact, he does have some 14th century armors of his own. So I'm hoping to do some videos with him about those armors. So
that'd be awesome.
Maybe we can do that. Nick, if I was to push you and say, right, okay, I'm gonna give you an armor today. Any of these Warhammer Fantasy armors, which one would you choose?
Probably Swordmaster gear.
Yeah.
Either Swordmaster or Phoenix Guard, because I prefer halberds over greatswords. But I'm not a massive fan of the wings on the Phoenix Guard helms.
Yeah. Yeah, understandable.
What about you?
Yeah. I'd go for High Elf, and I'm not fussy. I would probably go for silver helm. I think. Yeah. I think the Dragon Prince armor is a bit too close to Gothic. You know, you got all the flutes and things like that. I like a certain amount of simplicity. Simplicity in my gorgeous elven armor. There's some, yeah. There's some really nice early metal silver helms that had like horsehair crests and things like that. So that's the one that I'd go for.
I might have some of those.
There we go, guys. What would you choose if I had a magical armor tree and I could give you an armor from Warhammer Fantasy? Which one would you choose? If you've reached it to the end, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let us know what you would choose, and do check out my Patreon. You can find that in the description, and join us again for some more videos over February and for our next live stream in March. What have you got to do in February, by the way, Nick? What's on?
Clean
Do you remember
all my armor.
Clean all your armor.
Yep.
Ouch.
That is probably not this weekend, because this weekend hopefully I'm getting the new kitchen shed up and making sure that's all in working order. It's possibly the weekend after. That is going to be a nice Saturday afternoon, I think. How many videos have you got to make?
I've got to make 4 videos. I've got to make 1 piece of armor to sell. And I was meant to do some work on my brother's armor in February half term, but there's been some childcare issues, so I may not be able to get to the workshop with him for that. So we shall see. We shall see what we manage to do. I'm definitely going to get my leather cuirass finished though.
Yeah, I need to get some glue.
Yeah, and I can probably work
holding out because I want to get some reversible archival glue or some reversible animal hide glue to finish it up.
Okay. Animal hide glue, tricky.
Yeah.
Smelly.
Yeah, but like reversible archival glue, very expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know what we should do? We should probably put links to our Instagrams in this, because I share a lot of my work in progress on Instagram.
You should share your Instagram. My Instagram, I don't think has any posts on it.
Okay. Yeah. All right then. Well, maybe I'll do that.
Yeah.
Maybe we should. Maybe we could even get a freelance Instagram and we can both share.
That might be a good plan.
Yeah. We'll see.
All right.
What do you think? What do you think?
Let us all know.
Subscribe. See you guys.